Unmask the supernatural. Explore the history and future of parapsychology. Analyze legends and folklore. And welcome entertaining and informative guests as they probe irresistible mysteries that continue to haunt us. They may not always agree. In fact, they won't. But the Dueling Parapsychologists provide an investigative podcast that's not afraid to seek the truth and separate nonsense. With your hosts, Elliott Van Dusen and Darryll Walsh. Welcome to the Dueling Parapsychologists Podcast.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Dueling Parapsychologist Podcast. We have a very special guest that I have been trying to get him on here for a little while. His name is John Kruth, and he is the Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center, and he also runs the Rhine Education Center, which is probably the one thing I promote on this show every time is the Rhine Education Center, just because it is one of the only reputable places to take parapsychology courses. So I always push that. But we had done a survey a little while ago, John, with our guests, and they wanted to hear about kind of more about ESP and psychokinesis. And that's kind of where you came in. I know that you have done a lot of research in the Rhine Research Lab with ESP and psychokinesis. Would you be able to tell us some of the different things that you've worked on there?
Oh, sure. I've been working at the Rhine now doing research for about 12 years. So there's a lot of different projects that I've been working on. But first of all, let me say thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here with you guys. And Elliott, I know I've spoken to you quite a bit, and Darryll, it's very nice to meet you today.
Nice to meet you.
At the Rhine, the primary objective of the Rhine is to produce groundbreaking and top-notch research in the field of parapsychology and around the ideas of consciousness studies. Since I've gotten there, one of the things that I've focused on is the subtle energies of the body. And this includes things like, can people affect other objects outside of their body? Kind of what we call an expressive form of psi. And this is mind-matter interaction, psychokinesis. The old term is telekinesis. We don't really use that term in the field anymore. But psychokinesis or mind-matter interaction, PK, these are the terms we often use. And so I've been doing a number of studies with people who have come into the lab, and it's really rare, but people have come in and they demonstrate PK in front of me before we ever start any studies. They demonstrate that they're able to affect objects in different ways or electronics in different ways. As I said, it's really rare. And what's even more rare is to have someone who can do it consistently and on command. And I've had two extremely successful and extremely talented people at doing that within our laboratory environment. What's nice about that is when you have someone who can do it consistently, you can start to play with it a little bit and try to see, can I stop it? Can I figure out what it is? If I can stop it from happening, then there's a good chance I can learn more about how it works. And so this is one of the main projects that I've been working on at the Rhine. In terms of ESP is kind of a big topic because it includes things like telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, clairvoyance, getting information from a distance, or precognition, getting information through time. All three of these things together, a lot of times it's hard for us to determine which one it is, so we just call it general ESP. So when I'm talking about ESP, I'm talking about any of those or all of those phenomena together because we can't always differentiate in the lab. The studies that we've focused on at the Rhine within the last 10 or 12 years have been related to understanding more about remote viewing, understanding a bit more about how people are able to get information from what we call targets. Anytime you're doing an ESP study, you have people trying to get information about something they either can't see, they can't get, it's far from them, or it hasn't happened yet. It's something that's going to be shown to them in the future. But there's always a target involved. A big question is, what's a good target? And how do we determine what's one target, how one target might be better than another? Why are some targets better for some people than others? And do we need targets? For example, a lot of people use photographs in a lot of remote viewing experiments, and I'm assuming that your group knows a bit about remote viewing. A lot of remote viewing experiments, they'll have a photo that's hidden in an envelope, or someone will generate a photo off of the internet. They'll get some general photo, but photos in general, they can be pretty boring. They're not active in any way. You need something. So people tend to be more attracted to films than looking at just photographs. So how do we create active targets for people and still be able to judge them appropriately? A lot of these issues are some of the things we've been trying to parse out at the Rhine, pull apart different things.
What are some targets that you found your research participants have been successful with?
Well, as I was mentioning, videos instead of photographs, because of the fact that they're active. There are other characteristics of targets that we look at in terms of, for example, targets with people in them are difficult because when people see other people in life, a lot of times they're not seeing like an artist might see it, just as a flat surface where they can pick characteristics. They're seeing a lot more about the person, the way they act, the way they move, and so having a person in the target can complicate it. But if you go to the extreme from not having any people to only having things like landscapes, they're boring. Who wants to just, I mean, okay, I love art. I love Monet. I love, I love the different landscapes and the different scenes like this, but that doesn't engage people as much. You need something that's engaging, something that's going to capture them, something that's interesting. But it also needs to be something that's, as if you have multiple targets and you're trying to say, pick one of these is the one you're going to see. All of the targets have to be equally engaging. This is a really important characteristic, or it's likely that you pick one as the target and you have another one in the target set that's more engaging, more interesting. And when the person tries to guess which target it is, their attention is attracted to the one that's wrong. This is what we call displacement. So they'll oftentimes get a really, really great description of the wrong target within the set. So you have to have things that are equally engaging. So that's the type of thing we often look at. We look for things that are active and something that's going to really capture people's attention.
It's funny you mention that because one course I took with Lloyd had an exercise with remote viewing, and it was interesting. Some of the students, like including myself, we had like some common characteristics. Like a few of us had seen a body of water and a bridge and things like that, but when Lloyd ended up giving us where he actually was, it was like completely off. But I found it was interesting that we had set a particular date and time for all the students and Lloyd. Lloyd went out and did his thing, and then all the students had to like kind of remote view. And it was interesting to see that there was at least 3 or 4 students that had picked up like kind of the same similarities, but it was completely wrong though. But it was just, yeah, it was really interesting. And I don't know if it's because, like, I know Lloyd's in, around the San Francisco area, and like I could picture like the Golden Gate Bridge and the water and stuff like that. So I don't know if like that's kind of why that popped into my mind or not, but it's certainly an interesting phenomena for sure. The other thing that you like to do research on as well is computer systems and how people can affect computer systems. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with that?
Sure. For about 20 years, I worked in technology. And it's very well known when you work in technology, almost any software shop, that there are certain people who, when they walk in a room, everything breaks. And there are other people who, when they come in, everything seems to just work well. And usually the people who break things are the testers, and the people who make things work are the ones who are the developers. Well, this is, like I said, we have these stories for so long as I was in the computer industry, that when I came to the Rhine, my question was, is this real? is it really an effect that certain people have on technology? And how can we test it? So I started thinking along those lines and started trying to design an experiment that we might be able to use to test this. And in the process, about probably now, it's probably been about 8 or 9 years ago, we got a call at the Rhine from a medical doctor who was asking, he said he had a patient, and his patient was an 11-year-old boy whose parents, mom and his grandmother, had come in and said, we don't know what's wrong, but he can't use the phone. He's having a real strange effect on electronics. When he walks across the room, sometimes the phone will ring as he walks past it. And the remote control on a TV, when he holds it in his hand, the TV will start flipping channels even if he's not pressing buttons. He had a number of different smartphones that the screen just went weird on it and like flipped upside down or did strange things. The computer systems were breaking, and they went to the doctor and they said, there's something wrong with him. Can you help him? And the doctor did an exam and said, he's a normal kid. He's healthy. So what do you do? Well, fortunately, the doctor knew about the Rhine and knew about the work we did. So he sent he called and said, hey, can you guys do anything? Do you know anything about it? And my first thought is, these are people who are trying to get on TV, because this is just outlandish, right? So I met them. I decided I was going to kind of test the waters and meet them at the doctor's office and get a sense for who they were. Well, I made an appointment, and it was very clear within just a couple minutes of meeting them that these people were really sincere. They really wanted to see, they were worried about this, and they wanted it to stop. One of the things they said is, it's getting really expensive. He broke the washing machine. His grandmother wouldn't let him near a computer system. There were a number of different electronic devices that were just going nuts. They had electricians at the house. They had the phone guy. They knew the phone guy by his first name because they had so many problems with their phones. They had so many different people check it out, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And the little boy said to me, really quiet little boy, he said, and these are his words, I'm afraid that my electromagnetic field is going to hurt my granny. And at that point, I knew that this was something that we needed to look into further. So I got together with one of my other researchers, and we visited them where the phenomena happened the most, at his house. We traveled to his house, and we sat down with them and just had a conversation. And they started telling us about the phone and what was going on. And I said, well, which phone? And they said, oh, that one over there. And I looked over and I said, oh, you mean underneath that big metal pot? And they said, yeah, we have to put this big metal pot on top of the phone. Otherwise, it beeps all the time whenever he goes near it. I was like, that's strange, right? So I said, okay, so if you're using that phone and he calls, what phone does he call? And then mom goes, my cell phone. I said, well, let's try it out. So we tried it out, and we immediately, within just a few seconds, as he made the phone call, started to get feedback on the phone, really loud feedback. I gave the phone to my my co-researcher and went in the other room where he was with the cordless, and I saw him. He was really upset and frustrated with the phone. And so I asked him, I said, calm down a minute. Can I see the phone? And so I took it from him, and I talked, and I said, can you hear me, Bill, my friend? And Bill's like, I can hear you fine, John. I said, okay, hang on a sec. I gave it back to this little boy, and immediately the feedback started again. So it was something that wasn't happening with me, but it was happening when he had it in his hand. We saw other things like, for example, the computer system that he had a brand new computer. Anytime he printed anything on the printer, all of the paper would scroll out of the printer, all of it. And then his grandmother would turn off the printer, put the paper back, turn it back on, and it would print fine. And then the next time he tried to print, all the paper would go through. Same thing again. So I tried this as well on my own, using the exact same procedures, printed just fine. Had him do it again, and the same thing happened again. So this was something, it was obvious there was something going on here. And it seemed to be that it seems that in other cases, I spoke to other people who've had similar sort of problems, what we call poltergeist disturbances. It doesn't mean there's a ghost there. It means it's some unconscious activity coming from an individual. So speaking to other people, they told me that, well, maybe if he learns some relaxation techniques and learns how to do some breathing exercises, and perhaps if he learned to recognize when it was coming. So I taught him a relaxation technique, taught him some mindfulness, so he could identify the triggers. He started using this mindfulness technique and identifying a trigger, and as soon as he got a sense of it, he'd start doing his breathing exercises. Within a week, all the phenomena disappeared. Everything that had been going on, and there was more than I described, but there was a lot of different phenomena. This was like a godsend, that all of a sudden the family was like, wow, this is so great. About 2 weeks later, they had a change in their family structure, and it started bringing anxiety back into the family. All the phenomena came back again. So I encouraged them to use the breathing technique to help to resolve it, and it did. The reason I'm going through this description is because this introduced the idea that it's anxiety or strong emotions that could be having an effect on electronics. It's causing an unconscious effect on the electronics. And then my question was, is this unique to the individual, or is this a more general type of trend that we see? Similar to what I was seeing in the computer industry. Are there certain people who get anxious around technology, and when they're anxious, it starts having issues with the computer systems? So I designed a study. And the study essentially put people in front of a computer and asked them to do a bunch of tasks while I was running another computer system in the same room that they didn't know about. And that computer network that was in the room, I was counting errors that were in the transmission of some files. And I found that there were more errors when people were anxious doing the tasks I was asking them to do. So it indicates that anxiety can cause not only you to make mistakes when you're working on electronics, but it can also just affect the electronics in a general way. This is what we call an unconscious PK effect. I named it the 21st century poltergeist because it's kind of a, back in the 20th century, whenever we were looking at poltergeists, we were looking at objects moving. We're looking at people who are having things fall off the walls. We still have these sorts of phenomena in rare cases. But because we have so many electronics in our life now, it's more likely that these phenomena are going to start to appear in electronic systems. And so this is what we found, that anxiety or strong emotions tend to have an effect on electronic devices.
Yeah, that's that I could see, like it's really interesting, all that phenomena is occurring, but I could see how it would be stressful for the family. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can't even have the kid print something out without the printer, going through all your paper or use the telephone appropriately. I actually had a lady that sent me a painting that she had done while she was under a lot of stress. And when she tried to mail it to me and give me the different options for shipping, her phone kept crashing because she was so stressed about it. And so it's really interesting that you had mentioned like the 21st century poltergeist, but it is true. It seems to be so true.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it seems to be very common. And oftentimes when we're doing these sorts of Zoom meetings or these sorts of interviews like this, when people start to get stressed, things start to drop out here and there. I'm sure you guys have experienced this here and there.
Well, I almost think Darryll has that problem because he always seems to struggle with technology.
It's Macs. It's Apple. It's as simple as that. They're pieces of crap. End of story. If I had a PC here, I'd have no problems whatsoever.
Yeah, it's true. Every time we try and set something up with Zoom or anything like that, Darryll seems to have some struggles with it.
Of course, don't forget, this was your fault because you had me off video. So it's entirely possible all the times. Donna was, in fact, hosting. It might have been the fact that she just had me off audio or something. And here I am, trying to fight with the computer to get it to work. And it turns out it's not even my fault, although I'm still going to blame the Mac. So,
Well, you know, we haven't done any studies with PCs versus Macs in this. We were using PCs across the board when we did it because, well, I'm just not Mac savvy, so I leave those off as well. But hey, maybe that's a good place to go next.
Yeah.
PCs versus Macs and how that works.
That would be really, really cool, really interesting, especially.
Well, then the Linux people get mad at me, and you know, I'll have all we'll
have
all
be very
kind of other
annoyed
people
with a Mac. So
right.
it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 times as many things you have to do in order to do 1 to 2 things on a PC. So it can get extremely annoying. And so I try not to use the Mac as often as possible. And it knows I hate it, and it hates me back just as bad.
Yeah, but we're keeping it going today.
Now, the other type of work you've done, John, is psychokinesis work. Can you tell us about some of the great cases you've had there?
So what I've been talking about are cases of unconscious influence on electronics, but it's a form of psychokinesis. It's all PK under this. But electronic psychokinesis is something we call micro PK. It's small, something you can't see whenever it happens, or something you have to use other devices to measure that it's occurring. And besides what we've done with the computer systems, we've also used random number generators, which have like a little quantum process inside of them to see if people could affect the quantum processes. Random number generators are essentially like an automatic coin flipper, heads or tails, either ones or zeros, the same way. And we have people try to produce more ones or more zeros. Besides this unconscious activity, people can consciously have an effect as well. And I say that because I've seen this in the lab quite often, where I have certain people come in and they're able to consciously, not always producing ones or zeros, because that gets really boring too. See, that's the thing about this. If you're trying to do this stuff, you have to keep it interesting for people. You don't want to have people just making more ones, because how interesting is that for any period of time? So what we do is we put other interfaces on it through the computer system by doing things like, let's say, when you get a lot of one, you have a picture on a screen, it's all blurry. And when you get a lot of ones, it clears it up and you can see the picture really well. Hey, that's more interesting to people. They want to see the picture. It gets them engaged, makes them want to do it. Whereas, or might have something like you have a dot moving around the screen. And you want to get the dot moving in a certain direction. And if you get more ones in a random number generator, it'll move in a certain place than the other. This gets people to stop thinking in terms of the random number generator. And it gets them to stop thinking in terms of ones and zeros, and gets them to start thinking in terms of a task they want to accomplish. This is where the real benefits come when we're working in a lab. That's when we see the most effects. When you have we have another form of PK called macro PK. This is something you can actually see. When I first saw this, it was phenomenal. It was one of the most phenomenal things. I mean, really, I was sitting in the Rhine library there were 11 researchers and a woman sitting at one end of the table with what we call a psi wheel. It's just a aluminum foil pinwheel that is balanced on top of a pin, and it moves very easily. It's very light. It moves very easily. But she had it within a jar, like a empty jar, so it would be protected from wind. You wouldn't have any static electricity affect it. Magnets wouldn't affect it or anything. And the question was, could she move it within the jar? Well, it wasn't a question we asked. She came because she said she could do this. And she did. She had it spinning. She put her hand next to it and it started spinning. And she continued to spin it in that direction. My immediate response was, wow, if this is really happening, maybe there's something going on here, that the way that it's set up. So I asked her to stop it. And she took her hands away and it stopped. And then I asked her, can you turn it in the other direction? And she used her finger, and moving her finger was able to get it turning in the other direction. This demonstrated control to me. It wasn't just something happening. She was able to control it in different ways. The interesting thing to me beyond the fact that psychokinesis was going on, is that I talked to her later and she said, you know, this isn't, when you asked me to do that, it was a lot of anxiety and stress sitting in front of all those people. I thought this was just something she was doing, but no, it was, she was being tested at the Rhine to see if she could do this. It produced a lot of anxiety. And so I tried to make sure that didn't happen again. And once we saw this, we did some further experiments with her where we not only used these pinwheels that she was using, but we used other devices. We had something called an Edgley wheel, which is a manufactured device. It says it's developed for what is it? As a vitality meter. It's supposed to tell your life force energy. Yeah, we don't measure it that way. We don't consider that's what it's measuring. But what it is it's a manufactured, very precise instrument that's extremely well balanced. It's perfect for doing the types of tests we want to do for PK. And so we take these and we put them inside of those clear food storage containers where you can see through them, but it blocks out any sort of airflow. I've tested things like putting heat next to them, trying to use static around them, all types of different ways to move it. I couldn't move it. But we have people who sit next to these while they're in these closed off environments, and they're able to make them spin and able to make them move. This is, it's phenomenal. There's something that we can't see, we can't measure in any way, but it is intentionally affecting physical objects that we're able to see it happen. Now, if this is happening in our lab with these little wheels and things like this, could it be happening in our lives in other ways? And could it be affecting more than just these little toys that we're doing? Could it be affecting other people as well? Could it be causing healing to occur when people say they're energy healers? Could this be one of the mechanisms for it? So this is where some of our studies have moved to since that time.
What kind of materials have you tested in this way? Because obviously with a pinwheel, some people, the skeptics would say that, well, obviously there was a hidden magnet somewhere, and so she was able to just, or something implanted in her hand or something Terminator style. But I take it you tested in more than just a pinwheel. Did you test wood or paper and all the usual things that you would expect?
So the one she brought originally was aluminum foil, and the first thing I did whenever I went to have her do some things, I checked her under her fingernails, I checked under the table, I checked, because she was doing it she was performing this she decided to do it, not on our request. Later, when we did it on our request, we used our instruments, we used our environments, we were very careful about everything and controlling everything, because, when we're working in a lab, we'll oftentimes start design an experiment. We'll take months to put an experiment together, figure out how we want to set it up. We'll talk to other researchers, talk to people who are magicians, and say, how could we be, are we making any mistakes? How can we make this better? We do everything we can to make sure we're not making any mistakes. After months, we'll then do an experiment, and we'll see exactly the effect we were looking for. And our first thought is, what did we do wrong? Because this is impossible. There's no way this could happen. So we've done things like Darryll, we've used the Edgley wheel is plastic, so it's obviously not affected by magnets, but it could be affected by static electricity. So we do things, we make it more difficult for static to have any effect. And I've actually put it in an environment and tested it with static, created a static field, and tried to see if I could move it with the static field, and no effect on this. So every type of physical effect we could think of, I tested, including things like light. I used different lasers and shining lasers at it in different colors to see if that would affect it. Anything we could think of. and we haven't been able to cause it to move in those environments. And yet, intention or attention to the instrument seems to cause it. Some people are able to cause it to move. And so my thought is, can I block it? Can I stop them from being able to do this? Well, I have one person who does not working with the wheels, but working with electronics. He's able to do it quite regularly. He has we have an electronic instrument that it measures static fields. He's able to affect it from a distance and cause it to move and cause it to register a static field. And when I say a distance, it seemed like the optimal distance where he could consistently create an effect was about a little more than 1.5 meters. Once he got beyond that, he could still do it. It just wasn't as consistent. And so the question was, well, why do we have this limit? And is there something I can do to stop it from happening? So I put the device inside of a room, and I threw a wooden door and had him on the other side of a wooden door and asked him to try to affect the device, and got nothing. Wasn't moving at all. And I was like, okay, well, this is how we block it, right? But he happened to have a GoPro with him because he was filming what he was doing. He wanted to have a record of what was happening. So I said, well, let's put the GoPro in the room so you can see the device and have his computer screen outside so he could monitor it. When we did that, it moved like clockwork. All he had to do was be able to see it. It didn't matter if I had a wooden door between them. It didn't matter if I moved it further away. If he could see it, he could cause the effect. This was really enlightening because it seemed to have more to do with his psychology than it had to do with any sort of energetic blocking some sort of energy. And this was reinforced for me later on, where we have at the Rhine, we have rooms that are surrounded with metal to prevent radio waves and electronics from affecting them. So I put the device inside of the metal room on the other side of a metal wall, and I asked him to affect it from outside the room. He believes that everything he does is electronic. He knows that this room is going to block any electricity. It didn't work. No matter what I did, it wouldn't work. But as soon as I moved him the same distance somewhere else in the room, worked fine. I believe that this has to do with his belief that it's electrical. And because he knows this will block the electricity, that's where we're having an issue. So I'm wondering if I can set up some sort of electronic force field that you can't see. I've tried to talk to physicists about this. I've talked to electrical engineers. No one can tell me how to produce this yet. Maybe we have a few years to go before we can actually produce this technology, or maybe there's someone who can do it who might be able to help me with it. But I haven't been able to produce what we call a Faraday cage to block all the electricity that you can't tell whether it's on or off. If I can do that, I can test the theory of whether it's his psychology or whether it's really an electrical phenomena.
Fascinating.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. How does the Rhine get its money to do its research, John? Where does the funding come from? And is the Rhine probably one of the only parapsychology labs in North America?
And there's a number of different parapsychology labs or people studying parapsychology within the States and within North America. For example, there's work going on at the University of Virginia. There's a division of perceptual studies, which is studying something similar to what we're studying, but also they study a great deal related to reincarnation and survival of the spirit. There is some research going on at different universities and some other spots. One of the big institutes is the Institute of Noetic Sciences that's in California, IONS. And IONS has a number of parapsychologists, including Dean Radin, who is very well known and has written a number of books in the field. And they've been doing research in parapsychology along the lines of what I'm talking about and similar type of phenomena. And there's also the Windbridge Research Center, which is in Arizona. These are the major research centers in the States and in North America. There is another institute in Mexico, but I don't know the name of it right now because they're fairly new. All of our organizations are independently funded. It's very difficult to get any federal funding or any, like, for example, National Institute of Health for healing studies, national or the Education Institute. It's very difficult to get study from national organizations. So we're always looking for independent sources of funding for research. There are a few funding organizations. One of them is actually in Portugal, and it's a drug company. It's called BIAL, BIAL. And the BIAL Institute, they're a pharmaceutical company, but they provide funding for parapsychology and for the neurosciences. Not big grants. I mean, we're talking over, usually the largest grant they would give is about $50,000 for 2 years, which for research is very, very small, very, very small. And it's very difficult to get because there's a lot of competition for it. In addition, there was recently a man named Bob Bigelow, who owns an aerospace company. You might have heard of his name before. If you haven't, he's very, very well connected and has been very successful in business. He put out a challenge a few years ago for people to provide evidence of survival, that there's something that is beyond our physical body, something that exists beyond death. And they had, I think they had a number of people who submitted essays, had about 80 finalists, and of those 80 finalists, they provided some awards. The top award was a $500,000 prize, which went to Jeffrey Mishlove, who is, yes, in Las Vegas, who has a podcast called New Thinking Aloud. Really, really excellent. But there were a number of other colleagues within the field who also were able to get some funding from this. This is rare, that people put up private awards like this, or that there are opportunities. Most scientific research, there's a funding source from, there's a lot of funding going on. It's difficult for us within parapsychology because that's not the case. But we do have some people who are very interested who will provide some funds. At the Rhine, the majority of our funds come from memberships and donations. And so we encourage people, because we offer more than just the research. Yes, we do the research, but if you do the research but you don't tell anybody about it, you might as well be working in a cave, right? So we publish the Journal of Parapsychology, which it's the primary journal within the field, provides an outlet for all of the research that's done at the Rhine and at other institutions around the field. We also have the Rhine Education Center, which, as Elliott mentioned, it has courses in parapsychology, not teaching people to be psychic, but teaching them about how to learn about these topics. And we also have educational events quite often where we have people that will present on either their research, their experiences, or different types of activities. So all of these things kind of work together to create a community of people. And so this is what we offer, not only the research to the field, but also resources, because Rhine's been around since 1935. It's been around for a very long time. And also the educational opportunities.
That's amazing. I'll make sure to put links as well on the video as well. So if somebody wants to subscribe to the Journal of Parapsychology, both Darryll and I are subscribed to that. We're also subscribed to the Society for Psychical Research's journal. There's a few out there now as well. I know the Society for Scientific Exploration does a journal now as well, and it's great.
They have a great journal, and it's open access, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's great to see a lot, like you said, the funding in parapsychology is so tight that a lot of people that are doing parapsychological work are kind of doing it from the corner of their desk. Darryll had the pleasure of meeting Michael Persinger at Laurentian University before he died, and he was doing neuroscience work, but he was also kind of doing like sneaking some parapsychology work in there as well, which was really cool. And Darryll is kind of like a little bit skeptical of PK, but the one thing that really blew his mind, because he's never witnessed it firsthand. But the one thing that blew his mind, I know, was when he was talking to Michael Persinger, because he had told, I'll let Darryll tell the story, but he had told Darryll a story which kind of, made the wheels turn there.
What had happened, it was for the television series Shadowhunter, and so we had gone up to Laurentian University, and we were interviewing him, and what had happened was most of the time the director would be asking the questions because she knew what she needed to get ahead of time so that there wouldn't be that much editing. And sort of like today's podcast is going on very smoothly, so therefore it's not it'll be very easy on Elliott this time to edit it. But afterwards he took me around and showed me lots of stuff, and he was a neuroscientist, and I did not take neuroscience. It just was way too complicated for me. I wasn't very interested in it at the time, in psychology, so I missed that. And so he was taking me around and showing me things, and I was getting a little confused at a few things, but there was enough stuff there that, so we sat down that we were able to bond or talk, relate in some way. And so afterwards, while they're taking down all the cameras and lighting and everything like that for the show, I sat in the chair and was talking to him. And he had said he had a female student come into his lab one day, and his table, unlike mine, it was fairly, clean, at least in the middle. He had typical professors, right, piled up this high on either side, but the middle was more or less clean. And there was a pen, just happened to be pen or pencil, which would be important if related back to my question about the material, but I believe it was a pen. And she was able to, in front of him. Now, Michael Persinger was the epitome of the neuroscientist, social scientist. He was often in shows in the 1990s as not quite the debunker, but the person who would have an alternative exploration, a very complicated one, but an explanation for it. And he said, I think I had asked the question about, because I found out during the interview that he was not quite the skeptic that he's portrayed on TV. So I asked him the question, have you ever had anything, happen? And because I don't know if you know anything about Michael Persinger, but he had created the God helmet, and which I did not get to use, but because we didn't give them enough notice that we wanted to use it, and because I would have loved to have used that. But so he said, besides all that, which I'm known for, he said, I had a female student come in one day, and she was talking, and we got talking about various things. And she said she could move something with her mind. And just as I kind of leaned forward to ask her what, he said, the pen just moved across the table. So he asked her to do it again. And she did it. I mean, we're not talking great distances, but it was, how big was this table? Probably a little bit bigger than mine, 12 inches, let's say a foot. And so anyway, which was fascinating. And so he said, I do believe, there are aspects, parapsychology that are true. Now, unfortunately, we had somebody else interview. They had finished their breakdown of everything type of thing. So I couldn't pursue it I asked him, did you test her? And he said, no. It was either the end of class, end of term, end of something, or she graduated, whatever. I can't remember now because we're going back to 2004. And but it was fascinating and to hear him, because I have, of course, even my teaching of parapsychology in the late 90s and watching everything that I could, which was on the Learning Channel at the time when you actually learn stuff on the Learning Channel. I used to love Friday nights, and I had seen him enough times that I thought he was a skeptic, and it turned out that he wasn't a skeptic. He might have an alternative explanation, and for instance, he has an alternative explanation of why some psychics seem to be able to read you very well, besides cold reading and the usual frauds that we know. And he says, just like there are people who can paint the Sistine Chapel, there are very few of them. There are people who can read people's body language to a degree that 90 some odd % of us can't do and can't even conceptualize. And he said, yet they can read them. And he says it's extremely rare and it's weak. He says, but this seems to be, this is 2004, 2005. He said, this seems to be the way it is in parapsychology in general, that it's rare, it's weak, and, we may never have an applied parapsychology department. But so that was kind of fascinating. And it was a good way to explain some people's ability to be able to just sit down and know this person that they should not know, as long as you made sure that there was no, they didn't know who they were going to meet ahead of time, and the usual controls we'd have to have. But some people are just able to do it anyway, even though they've been, we've tried to control for everything. So,
and oftentimes they don't even know that they're doing it.
Yeah.
They don't even recognize that they're reading the other person. They just think they know this information.
Well, even Jay Leno, he had one of the actors from Sopranos, I think it was, and his name, I forget, it was so-and-so is a judgmental bastard. And they would stand on a corner in New York City, and Jay Leno would pick the person, and the person would come here. Buddy would get it 90 some odd % of the time. Who they were, what they did, all the whole bunch of things. And it was just phenomenal to see it in action, because I had heard Persinger say it, but I had not actually, or his theory of it, but there was in living, color, essentially, this demonstration that you actually can, some people actually are able to do it. And in this case, of course, obviously, this guy who was, on TV as a gangster, and I think he probably was on The Sopranos. If not, he was on certainly in a gangster movie. To see him, he must have figured it out at some point. And probably while they were being very bored, like it is when you're setting up for a TV show, it's probably how he honed his skill. And it was very good to see, actually. I had this was back in the day before I had the recording DVD players, so I don't have it, and I lost all my VHS, so most of them, so I don't even have a episode. But I'm pretty sure if you want to, you could probably dig and find it online. It's got to be online. And I have actually my mechanic to my car knows Jay Leno very well, because they're both in the exotic car or collecting thing. And so anyway, if I can't find it or nobody can find it, I'm sure I can get a message through to Jay to have something sent, just to demonstrate it. But I'm sure it's got to be online. Somebody must have been just as interested as I was, and amazed, and put it online.
So this is the type of thing that what you're describing, people have amazing abilities. It's exceptional, and a lot of times it's very unconscious. They just do things because they have either a goal in mind and they're trying to figure out how to do it, and they don't even think about what the mechanism is. They just do it, and some people are really good at it. Yeah. Our task as parapsychologists are to try to eliminate any sort of bleed through of information. So in this situation, if we had someone who said, I'm able to know other things, everything about another person, we wouldn't ever let them see that person. We wouldn't ever let them talk to that person. We would keep them separated, not only in different rooms, but we wouldn't even let them talk to someone who has spoken to that person. Yeah. We put intermediaries in place all through to try to, you talk about double-blind experiments. The Windbridge Research Center actually is doing 5 times blinding in research studies. They're blocking The researcher doesn't know. The participant doesn't know. The people who do the judging don't know. Nobody knows. The primary researcher is the only one who knows everything, and they never come into contact with any of the people who are involved in the experiment itself. Because it is amazing how often you find that things just slip through.
Yeah.
If you're not exceptionally careful.
I know the one thing you talk about in a lot of the Rhine courses as well, John, is how like how mainstream science still kind of looks down upon parapsychology, and there's banter back and forth whether or not it's actually a science or whatnot. But we've also talked a lot about the stringent controls that have been put into place because of the skeptics and the criticism. So it's kind of funny when a parapsychological study is run, it's actually run very well and better than some other sciences.
Well, and Darryll, you study social sciences. If you look at social science research, it has to be done with a lot of caution as well. Because a lot of times people who don't believe parapsychology is a science, they also don't think psychology is a science. Because they're looking at physical sciences and they're different animals. They're just not the same.
Yeah.
So you have to have very strong controls in any social science experiment. And there's certain things that have been brought out in parapsychology studies that are now being much more accepted in mainstream science. The whole idea of the experimenter effect, how the experimenter has an impact on the study. They found just a few years ago that in biology studies, depending upon who the researcher is, the animals, the mice, would respond differently. What they found is that when the mice were being monitored by males versus females, they would have different behavior. They'd become more active. When they were being managed or monitored by females, they wouldn't. It was the pheromones. They were smelling the pheromones. How would you even know that? This isn't something you would consider at all. I should say they are assuming that it was the pheromones because they definitely saw a difference in how they were being treated based on the sex of the person who was monitoring the experiment. So parapsychology brought in the experimenter effect, also brought in things, the decline effect, something where you see certain effects will be very strong at first when you're doing studies, and then over a period of time, it starts to peter off and disappear. J.B. Rhine talked about this back in the 1940s and saw this in a lot of the studies related to parapsychology. People say, oh, well, it was just going back to chance. Really, there was no effect there in the first place. But they see it now in biology studies, in pharmacology. They're seeing that drugs are more effective when they're first released. And over a period of time, the drugs become less effective, even for people who have never been exposed to the drugs. So we don't know why, we don't know how, but the concept came out of J.B. Rhine's work at Duke University in the 1940s.
And interestingly, to Elliott's point, Chris French, who I also interviewed for Shadowhunter and got along well with, I got along well with just about everybody, but there were a couple nutters on, that, yeah. Anyway, got along very well with him, even though we disagreed on certain things. I believe in things, he disbelieved in most things. He's done some very good research into haunted houses and how to create one. And but the thing that we got talking about most at the time was what was it? Just about everything with the show. And so I got to know that he was generally, but he was nice about it. He was not judgmental. He was, but he was pretty firm that, science, the hard sciences can explain, what's going on in parapsychology. It has only been recently, he's retired within the last couple of years, that he's come out, and Chris French was at Goldsmiths College in the anomalistic psychology department, I should say, for our listeners and viewers. And he has now since come out and said, parapsychology is a true science and should be studied. And to have listened to him be very firm in his belief that most questions can be answered normally through normal scientific methods of psychology and misperceptions and blah 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 blah, the usual things we hear whenever we get an effect in anything. Here he is now saying like, yes, but I changed my mind. I think there is something to this. So perhaps he's had time to really delve into it, since he looked at it from the negative point of view for so long. Maybe he kind of, some people are able to do this, kind of turn it around and actually look at it fresh, and then realize that, hey, there is something to this science that, needs to be explored. Not every aspect of it, obviously, but, at least the things that we've talked about today, and which are fascinating. So I had a question about the boy that was causing so much trouble. Did you do any readings on him for electromagnetic interference? Did you do any environmental? I don't want to say it, but the ghost hunters, with all their equipment, did you? Which my head will explode when stuff like that is mentioned, but some of their equipment might have been useful, in trying to see if there was any environmental things going on simultaneously to this. You seem to have pinned it down to, just to psychology, but his mental state. But was there any, environmental effects or anything that was unusual picked up, or did you even do, any of those tests?
It's a very good question. The co-researcher that came with me is an electrical engineer at Duke. And he's been an electrical engineer at Duke for, I'm not exaggerating, more than 50 years. He's been a professor of electrical engineering at Duke. And as we went and we were there, of course, he brought his little meters and things with him because, well, he's an electrical engineer. He had them. And we brought them out whenever he was having these effects. And I followed this young boy around and was waving these meters at him and things in different situations. And we never saw anything that was unusual on them. We didn't have a full setup like you might have when you're doing a paranormal investigation. That wasn't our role.
Yeah.
They had asked us to come there because he was afraid. He was actually having problems at school because unlike whenever I was at school, all the tests are given on computers now. All the work that they do is on computers and shared computers within the classroom. And whenever he would use the computers, they would break, and the other kids couldn't use them. So the teacher thought he was breaking them on purpose. Thought he was having this effect I mentioned about the printers throwing all the paper. This happened while he was at school. So the teacher started making fun of him about these things. And it was having a large effect on him. My goal was to help them with what they requested. They requested to help to explain this and to see if we could help it to go away. Yes, I could have brought him into my laboratory. I could have poked and prodded him and wired him up with all types of things. But that wasn't what the family was asking for. And being a compassionate person, I put the people first.
And your suggestion worked. Your first suggestions of mindfulness and lowering stress worked. So there really wasn't any need to yank him into a lab. And how old was he?
He was 11.
Okay, so, there's 11 years old, would be a little bit frightened as well, being brought into a strange place and electrodes put all over him. So, yeah, that was, since your initial, prescription, so to speak, worked, there really wasn't any need to, but I was just curious because electromagnetism interests me, and I know it plays a part in parapsychology to, I believe, some way that we don't quite understand really at the moment. We know some ways it does, but there's also ways I think it does that we don't understand. And I'll probably die before the answer is ever found. But
let me help you on the way, though. Okay, because you brought a really nice lead into the more recent work that we're doing. So I couldn't bring this little child into the laboratory. I didn't feel it was appropriate to do that, especially with, you know, his mom being kind of satisfied with where it was going. But I do have other people who are producing electrical activity and interference. My question is what that is. Tried to block it in different ways. But one of the other labs we have at the lab is called the bioenergy lab, where we try to measure the subtle energies of the body. And what we're looking at the Rhine is what we call ultra-weak photon emissions. It was called biophotons. The terminology has changed. It's ultraviolet light that is produced by organic matter. It started back in the 1920s. There was a man who started doing the research, got lost for a number of years. In the 1970s, a man named Fritz Popp started looking at fruits and vegetables that were grown organically versus those that weren't, and looking at light emissions from them in the ultraviolet range. And he found that there was a difference between the light emissions. So he started to look at other sorts of organic matter to see if the light was different with different types of matter. He found any organic matter, whether it be plants, animals, people, of course, being animals, but even down to single cells. We had red blood cells that if you put a little saline on them, they'll pop. When they pop, they release ultraviolet light. And so this ultraviolet light is common in organic matter. When Fritz Popp was doing this back in the 1970s, it was crazy. People were like, it's light. Who cares? It's just light. Now it's being studied in biology departments around the world. It's upper level biology to try to understand what is this light and how is it used? Why is it being produced? How is it being produced? They haven't quite found a really good reason for, or a really good mechanism for its production yet. At the Rhine, we've had this light lab that's been set up for more than 15 years now. And what we do is we bring in people who say that they are healers, people who say they're meditators, and people who do martial arts, and a number of other people. And we look for changes in the light level around them when they're doing this type of activity. So we'll bring them in, and initially they'll sit in the lab and we just tell them to relax and do nothing. And it's a completely dark room. Because it's light, we're measuring, the device we have can measure actually a single photon of ultraviolet light every half second. So it's very, very little light that we're measuring in this room. So we have them in this really dark room. We have them sitting in the dark, say, don't do anything, just sit there for a minute. We get a nice baseline. And then we say, okay, start your meditation. Start your healing practice or your martial arts form that you might be doing. And we look and see if there's a change. What we found is about 90% of the people who come through that we have do this, no change. Baseline measurements all across the board. But in about 10% of the sessions, we've seen the light levels in the room change dramatically, going from a baseline of about 12 to 20 photons up to 80, which is 4 times a baseline. That's a big change. But we've also had people bring it into the hundreds, the thousands, and we've even had 2 people go over hundreds of thousands of photons a second. This is a huge difference. And it doesn't happen if you just have the room empty. It never happens with the equipment. The reason I mention this, Darryll, is because when we talk to people who are healers, martial artists, and meditators, they all talk about energies. They all talk about moving energies through the body. They talk about chi, life force energy, or kundalini energies rising through the body. And if you talk to a physicist, they say, look, potential energy, kinetic energy, it's neither of those. I don't know what it is, but it's not energy. We are measuring light. It is an electromagnetic energy. And this is commonly being studied in biology. We're just studying it in a different context. And we are finding that certain people are able to either produce or recruit this energy. Could this be the energy that people have been talking about as chi, as healing energies or kundalini energies? This is where we're going further with this study. So I've brought in some people who have done PK effects, and I've brought them into the lab, and oftentimes I see changes in the light whenever they are practicing their PK. I have more study to do on this, but this is the direction that we've been going at the Rhine for the past 10 or 12 years.
That is unreal, like absolutely amazing. I'm going to make sure that we definitely put links to the Rhine. So if anyone wants to sign up for a membership or anything like that, it all helps, with the Rhine research and the type of work that you guys are doing. Darryll and I would love to have a lab, but like I said, a ton of money involved in that, and the funding's not the best. So, I mean, that's great that you guys are doing it. Do you ever do any joint projects with some of the other organizations? Now, I know like Parapsychological Association has paired up with Scientific Society for Exploration, and they're doing a second conference together. But for research,
I'm the program chair for the conference again this year.
Oh, are you? So
Yes.
you're always busy. You're always busy.
No kidding.
Do you guys ever do any joint like research projects with some of these others so you can kind of combine your funding together?
We definitely do joint research projects with different researchers from different areas. I was speaking just a couple weeks ago to a woman who's in Australia who's planning to come to the States, and she wants to do some research in our bioenergy lab, mainly because there's not a lot of labs set up with the precision that we have at the Rhine. And so she would like to come in and do some work. Combining funding, it's about the science. It's about the knowledge, about the information. We need the funding to keep things going, but we're researchers. We're trying to keep the work going. And that's, so a lot of times it's not because we're combining funding that we do it. We do it in order to advance the science and bring in people with different expertise. This is one of the interesting things about parapsychology is it's not purely a social science. Psychology is definitely involved. Sociology is involved, but it's not purely a social science. Physics is involved. We're measuring light and energy. You have medical sciences where we're dealing with people doing healing. You have to have expertise in a number of different areas. And no, any one individual having that much expertise typically is going to be doing, it's difficult to find someone with that much knowledge, especially within a field that has such low funding levels as we do.
Oh, absolutely. You make a great point. Like if you're a brain surgeon, I mean, you're kind of like focusing on that area, anything to do with the brain, surgery, medical science, things like that. But parapsychology, like you just said, it's a mix of everything. It's biology, psychology. The Rhine is a course I'm in right now is para-anthropology, which looks at the socio-cultural factors. Like when we interview people, I had mentioned in my discussion post in week 1, Canadians and Americans, when they talk about a near-death experience, always talk about a bright light and a tunnel of light before they, go through the life review. But over in China and Japan, they talk about a bridge and crossing water before they go to their life review. So there's different socio-cultural aspects as well. So parapsychology, it's phenomenal when you see a bunch of different disciplines come together to try and like solve this problem. And I don't know, it just makes it so, I find it absolutely fascinating. Hopefully the next generation, they get their nose out of the iPads and the iPhones and like they embrace science, and we get some more brilliant minds like there are in the field right now, doing some great work.
Or they keep their noses in their iPads and they figure out how there's still these unusual things happen. And we have connections outside of the electronics that tend to hold us together, and we tend to know things that it should be impossible to know. How do you know these things? How do these things happen? And some of it may be as simple as reading micro cues or micro body language, but other parts seem to go beyond that. And this is where parapsychology will always have a place on trying to learn a little bit more about expanding the edges of our science.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Darryll, do you have any last couple questions for John. I mean, we could sit here and talk parapsychology with him all night.
Yeah, well, couldn't we? No, he answered it on all the, he answered my first two questions in his first, within your first question. So no, I'm fine.
Great, John. So what are I know I don't think you have like your own website or anything. You're mostly all through the Rhine, but anything, links or videos or YouTube channels or anything you want to let our listeners know that they can follow?
Pretty much everything I do. I run the Rhine YouTube channel. I run the Rhine website and the school, and most of my accounts are all set up through the Rhine. So it's completely fine to direct people to the Rhine. I'm not, as long as I'm tied to the Rhine, my fortunes are tied to the Rhine as well. So
okay, perfect. I'll make sure that we post because Rhine has it has Twitter, Facebook,
right?
So I'll make sure we get all those links out. Awesome.
Great,
and I'll make sure we post the links as well for anyone that wants to make any donations or anything like that. And now the last thing too, I'll say as well, the Rhine sometimes has special guest speakers just come and you just ask for a small donation and any member of the public can kind of sign in and listen to it. And do you have anything on the agenda coming up?
That's in flux right now. I don't really want to, we've been going through a little transition in the events area. So the schedule has been changing quite a bit. I don't want to make any announcements until it's firm because otherwise it would just confuse people. So
sure. So the best place is go to the Rhine website and get the latest information through there.
Get on our email list. That way you'll get announcement or follow us so that you'll see our announcements whenever we put them up on social media.
Perfect. Sounds great. And then we're right in the middle of courses right now. Do you have any sort of idea what courses might be coming up after the summer session?
So right now we're in the spring session at the Rhine Education Center, and the summer session starts in August. In August, we have some they're all 4-week courses that run through the month of August, and they're great courses. We have a course on out-of-body experience coming up with Graham Nickel. We have a course on lucid dreaming that's going to have Robert Wagner, a worldwide expert on lucid dreaming, who's going to be speaking about how to use your dreams and how to learn more about yourself through your dreams. We have a course on remote viewing with Paul Smith, a member of the Project Stargate, the psychic spying program from the U.S. government. We have a course on developing your intuition. That's going to be coming up as well. And there's another one in there as well, but those are a few of the courses that we're offering. And of course, in the fall, we have some great courses that will be more academically oriented that'll be coming up as well.
That's phenomenal. Well, listen, Darryll and I appreciate you. I know we tried to connect with you a couple of times and you're an extremely busy guy. You've got your finger on the pulse in a lot of different things, but we appreciate you taking some time out of your Monday to speak with us about some of these important topics, I think.
Indeed.
It's been great, and it's really nice meeting you, and nice to be here with you guys. I hope the program works out really well, and that you have a really great audience. I hope that we attract a few new people through this tonight.
Yes, hopefully. I know our most popular episode so far was when we had Lloyd Auerbach on here. We had him talk about poltergeist. And then, like I said, a lot of people wanted to hear a little bit about ESP and psychokinesis. So I'm hoping that hopefully the Rhine gets some website hits and people can find out some more information. Yeah,
it's great. That was really nice meeting you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a lot, John. I'll probably see you in class there next week.
I'll see you tomorrow night, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.
Take care, Darryll. Bye-bye.
Same to you, John.
Take care.
The Dueling Parapsychologist Podcast, an educational and entertaining podcast with Canadian parapsychologists Elliott Van Dusen and Darryll Walsh. To reach out to the Dueling Parapsychologists, see our Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, or email us directly at info@ppri.net.